Welcome to the TruthXChange podcast, a unique program where we have conversations about worldview, all through the lens of oneism and twoism. This lens is based on Romans 1:25. We've exchanged the truth of God for the lie, worship and serve creation rather than the creator who is blessed forevermore. I'm your host, Joshua Gilo, and I've got Mark Robinson back on the program with me. Hey, Mark.
Hey, good to be here.
Mark has been asked to be another speaker on our upcoming online symposium, which is the stolen identity, the theft of the binary in contemporary society. Dr. Jones framed this symposium with some questions. What are your pronouns? How do you identify? These current cultural questions are a restatement of one of the oldest questions of the human race. Who am I? Today's answers carry a beguiling temptation to define ourselves by looking within, whereas the older version implies that we should look outside ourselves, asking our creator to tell us what we need to know. So for this symposium, we endeavor to remind Christians that the only place we can safely ground our identity is in God, in the binary truth of Twoism, where God and the creation are distinct and where distinction is a good thing for our identity. So we've got a whole lineup of some veteran speakers. You are now a veteran speaker of the TruthXChange events. And then, of course, we've got some new rookies on the lineup. We'll be dealing with issues like intersectionality, transgenderism, human identity, patriarchy and feminism, law and personhood, the metaverse. We'll also be tackling the Enneagram with Pamela Frost. And then, Mark, you've been assigned the issue or the topic of education and personhood. And I think one of the reasons why we've asked you is because not only are you a teaching elder in the Presbyterian Church in America, serving pulpit supply, serving the means of grace, preaching the gospel, administering those sacraments of baptism and communion, but you also teach. And we were talking a little bit earlier before we jumped on here, but as a teacher, you're watching, I'm sure you've seen on Twitter or social media or some platform, the news and things that are happening in Florida and other schools around the country. There's a lot of concern, at least on conservative news sites, there's concern about things like critical race theory, intersectionality, the modified pronouns. And I was just at a prayer meeting 2 nights ago, and one of the ladies in the church came up to me. She's grandma, and she was showing me the school assignment that her kindergarten student grandson had to do, and it was something that was to be made for mom on Mother's Day. But and on this form, it was the thing where it says, "I like my mom because," and rather than saying she does, and then the kid would get to fill it in. It said, "I like them because they do." And this here in the state of South Carolina, where it's fairly broadly conservative, it was a wake-up call for this grandma. I was like, oh my goodness, I've seen this here and there. I've heard this from some of your material at TruthXChange, but I didn't really believe that it was going to come here. California, sure. South Carolina, no way. And so I was curious. Now you're up in Pittsburgh, the second city in Pennsylvania. Do you see that? I mean, but you teach at a Christian school, classical education. Is this the kind of stuff that the teachers are talking about in the coffee break room, or what does that look like? Do you ever get concerned about this kind of stuff knocking on the door of your school?
Oh, sure. Because students spend most of their life outside of school, so the data inputs, the worldview inputs that students get show up during their 6.5, 7 hours in the school day. So I get very concerned about it. I mean, I had a student, probably a couple of months ago, came to me at the beginning of class and said, "Mr. Robinson, so-and-so, and he mentioned another student, an upperclassman, said, there are 72 ways to identify ourselves. How do you identify? So this was a 9th grade boy in a classical Christian school coming in and with all seriousness asking me, how do you identify? Because he was just told there are 72 ways to identify by a fellow student, not a teacher, administrator, of course, but my fellow student. So, I just briefly and quickly told him that I identify as the sex and gender God made me, male, right? And we have these discussions all the time, just kind of ad hoc on the side. They come up because it's on the kids' hearts and minds. Not all the kids, but a sufficient number have imbibed from other sources, primarily social media, this kind of progressive worldview around human sexuality and identity that's swirling around in the West. And so they get that through, TikTok, TokTik, YouTube, online gaming. That's a whole world. I mean, I knew there was online games and things that you participate in as a group, but it's like the meta. It's like another universe. Like it's like another world. One kid just told me the other day, jokingly, that this other student got married on Fortnite. Went on a date, or no, I should say, I'm sorry, went on a date on Fortnite. I'm like, what? First of all, what is Fortnite? And how do you go on a date on Fortnite? So someone had to later explain to me, it's I guess a well-known group game or something where you do things together on the game, fight each other, take over towns. I'm not sure exactly. So yes, so to answer your question is, I see it even in a classical Christian school where most of the kids come from homes where in the very, very least, the parents are saying we are part of the church or we participate in church and things like that. And so the kids are aware of it. And to varying degrees, they embody it, these kinds of things. Last year I was teaching and someone asked me what I thought of gender dysphoria, 9th grade students, right? And I said, well, it's mostly just confusion caused by the effects of sin. We very much lay out a biblical worldview in terms of creation. We're created by God. Sin has marred everything that is good. God is at work in Christ redeeming things. And ultimately, there's going to be a fixing of all. All will be made new in consummation. So I constantly constantly reiterating that. And so I said that gender dysphoria mostly is confusion wrought by sin. Sin causes confusion and disorder. She jumped up. She was so angry. She's like, well, what did they think? They're born that way? And this is the only, she just had a very worldly view and that kind of expressive individualistic view that if the person is feeling this way, if the person thinks this way, then that is truth. Their truth is truth, right? Expressive individualism. Carl Trueman lays it out wonderfully comprehensively in his book about the modern self. She just exemplified that. And it wasn't that she just thought I differed. She really thought I was an enemy. And just like went and told her parents, went and told the administration, and, things like that. So I do see it because I don't tend to shy away from talking about these kinds of things because I want them to see through a biblical lens. I want them to think God's thoughts after him, particularly in areas of human sexuality, which is so under assault in the West. And it shows up in classical Christian schools and NAPARC churches. They're not immune to it because we live in the West, a decaying West around these areas. And so I see it all the time.
Yeah. What to your co-workers? I mean, are they concerned about those issues? Do you guys have those kind of chats? Any kind of like documentation passing around? Just we got to go through some sort of training or concern about lawsuits?
I think the board has done some of this. I think the board has dealt with, or has at least anticipated or thought about potential lawsuits. I know the board, the beliefs of the school mention espouse NAPARC biblical views about human sexuality in just a kind of bare bones kind of way. Some of my fellow teachers, they've expressed that they do see worldly kinds of worldviews, expressive individualistic worldviews showing up. I don't recall talking in detail about the pronoun issue, things like that. There's a fellow teaching elder who I work with who's also teaches Bible. We talk about these things, banter them back and forth, and just talk about what we're seeing in the classroom and the students, interactions with parents, just those kinds of general issues, just as like under shepherds would talk about. So I don't know that I don't spend a whole lot of time talking in detail with other teachers about these things, but it comes up from time to time, informally, ad hoc conversations. I don't remember an explicit conversation we had around the pronoun issue. We did talk a little about critical race theory, some of the racial kinds of issues that are cropping up in the culture that have manifested themselves in education, but not so much the pronoun, gender ideologies, things like that, at least at a group formal level.
Have you had to have any confrontations with parents yet, discussing like the pronouns? Or
I had to discuss, I did discuss with some parents when I was talking about an ethics class. We were talking about some of these broad issues of gender and sexuality, and I was posing questions around whether or not our specific sex is grounds for specific kinds of roles in the world, whether particular jobs are tied to. And I was posing it more Socratically and wanting, because I could tell that the student, it would be a hard thing for a number of the students to just kind of jump right into defining things and being very specific. So I'm like, okay, let's think about this. So do you think if God made two sexes and we're distinct, do you think that entails distinct roles in the world? And of course it does. The questions may surround to what extent, but it clearly does. I can't be a mother, right? Only a woman can be a mother. But then it extends beyond that, just the way God has shaped our minds and desires and our emphases and different things like that. Does that entail other kinds of roles which are largely gender specific, right? So I did that. I posed that question. We talked about it as little group discussions, and I showed some slides about, okay, so how about apparel, clothing? And I showed a picture of Ellen DeGeneres on the red carpet, and she was clearly dressed like a man, right? She was dressed in a kind of masculine way. But I posed the question, is this dress you would consider appropriate to being a woman, right? Things like that. So there was a family that was very, very troubled by that. And so I eventually did have a meeting with them to discuss some of those things. And I would say that, my view is very much just a kind of down the line, we want to call it conservative, traditional, NAPARC, historical reform view about these things. I don't consider myself extreme in any way, shape, or form, but I don't think they didn't hold to that. So they were troubled from that side of things, right? From that side of things. And there have been some others who were troubled that I expound upon the cultural mandate, the particular be fruitful, multiply aspect of the general cultural mandate, because I see that as something that is crumbling, right? We're below replacement level in America for the first time, 1.64 kids. You need 2.01 to be producing positively. And so I talk about that and say this is a major calling that is general for all of humanity. Doesn't mean every specific person is called to this. I mean, obviously, I'm telling them as a man who's never been married and has no children. So it's not that I'm saying every single human being must do this, but this is God's general call on humanity, is to fill the earth up with people. And you've got to make people. there's just all the kinds of benefits from that. And the Bible talks about fruitfulness being a blessing in every way, shape, or form, not just reproduction of children, but just in growth of food and wealth and things like that. This is indicative of it's a good thing, and it often calls it a blessing, right? So fruitlessness is treated like a curse, barrenness, a dry tree, right? These are pictures of just kind of the land not being blessed and things like that. So a number of people were troubled by that. Some just feeling like, okay, I believe that, but don't talk about it so much. Others, well, that basically is confining women to just bearing children, the whole barefoot and pregnant, So I've had some resistance on that kind of thing. The interesting thing is the curriculum makes a point to it spends some time on the cultural mandate as the beginning, as part of God's mission for humanity and making the earth and creating a priesthood, right? Creating a royal priesthood of people. Adam was a vice regent, a royalty, but a priest for God over the temple of the earth. And so it takes some time to kind of expound that as laying the groundwork for what our mission in the world is. Right? So you do get pushback. And interestingly, it's mainly people faring from a mainline
Right.
setting where
Sure.
sexuality is much more contested, much more openly progressive. Not so much from even NAPARC parents or families, but more, mainline Presbyterian or Anglican or something like that, Episcopalian, Roman Catholic, interestingly. So yeah, there is pushback, some moderate, but that's to be expected given where we are today.
Yeah. I was talking earlier today with another one of our speakers, Eowyn Stoddard, who's she's married to David Stoddard. They're MTW missionaries. Do you know David?
No, I think I know who they are. Is that Dr. Jones' daughter and son-in-law?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've seen them. Yes, I may be Facebook friends with them. But anyway, yeah.
So I was talking with her, she's going to be one of our speakers, and she's speaking on the issue of womanhood. And I had shared with her a story about how one of my boys, they all have their duties to do after dinner, and one of the boys, his duty is to do the dishes. And one of the days he was complaining about having to do the dishes, and then he just mouthed off and said, "Isn't this a woman's job?" And I said, "Son, where did you hear that?" And I said, this is not an issue of roles. This is an issue of being responsible. I said, one day when you move out of this house, and you will move out of this house, you will have to do your dishes. Right. And then when you get married, you're going to have to figure out how you guys work together and assign those duties. But there are some things in our household, for instance, trash, that my wife doesn't do. And it's not a, oh, I don't want to touch trash. It's simply because we are a family of 7, and that trash is heavy, right? There's no way my wife, her frame, can handle that massive trash bag at the end of the day. So I take it out, right? I mean, when I'm out on the road, either she's doing the trash or she's having one of the boys doing the trash. So there's some things that, but then there are very clear, as you said, there is a distinction. Like, I would not permit for my daughter to go to war. War is not a woman's job.
Right.
I mean, anyone who thinks that a woman should be on the front lines has never known the evils of war, the grisliness of war. I mean, and we have men come home from war who have been greatly traumatized. Imagine what that would do to a woman's psyche. Anyways, moving on. That's interesting though about even in classical education, it's not, parents are not safe from the throes. And I've often heard that from some parents. Well, my son goes to X Christian school. I don't need to worry about this. I'm thankful, and thank God for Christian education, right? But your son is still in this world. And, you brought up the gaming. thing. I did not even think about that kind of platform and how much that could have community impact culturally on kids' minds. Even though I've got 5 kids, we're totally oblivious to that realm. Like we have a game night, a video game night, and it's on the old Nintendo 8 bits. We're all huddled around on those, those rectangle remotes, and our thumbs are aching from playing. But we know nothing of the internet realm, and I mostly did that just because I'm kind of a dinosaur when it comes to technology. But I never thought about the impact that gaming could have on the minds and which creates its own culture of young people.
Right. I mean, there's kids now, I don't know when it started, or someone wrote a book about the digital village. The kids grow up. I mean, they've only ever known a digital world, right? We transitioned into, I don't know how old you are, but I transitioned into my early 20s into the whole email world. I remember the first guy on the hall getting the email. I was in college. We huddled around his computer so that he could send a message instantly. Wow. It wasn't, instead of 3 days, snail mail. But kids now, I mean, I was talking to the kids the other day and I said, look, Facebook is as old as you guys are. Right? Facebook, what, 2006, 2007? I mean, they had it for a couple of years in Ivy League, but these kids are 14, 15. That puts them 2007, 2008. And I said, Facebook is as old as you are. And none of them use Facebook, of course. That's for old, that's boomer. That's
okay, boomer.
So that's what they know. And most of the parents, to their credit, the kids at least say their parents don't allow them to use some of these social media applications and things, although they are very well aware of them. So I don't know if they're sneaking or what's going on, but yeah, that's a whole world. And it's what's catechizing them. It's a major catechetical influence on how they see the world, celebrity, fame. When I asked them about what sins do you feel tempted by, the Israelites were tempted by idolatry constantly in a kind of multi-god world, right? Not polytheistic, but what's the word when a bunch of forget. Anyway, in a world in which, panoplies of gods, ancient Near Eastern gods was common, they're constantly tempted to that. And what are you tempted by? And a lot of them put celebrity, social media celebrity, TikTok famous, they're really tempted to take on the worldview being portrayed in an Instagram kind of world. That's like a big temptation to 15-year-olds and 14-year-olds. And, we saw it over the pandemic with kids, committing suicide from online taunting, things like that, and being shamed online and things of that nature. So it's a big thing. It's a really big thing, which surprised me. I didn't realize it was so influential. I feel like I'm still. It's not native to me, though. I'm on social media, just a couple apps. It's not native. I feel like it's an extra thing, right? Mm-hmm. For the kids, it's just like part of their whole DNA. They just kind of just automatically are, which I don't see as a net good. It's not a net good. Parents should not give kids access to these apps, and that's just I just don't understand allowing that to allowing kids to have that. But yeah, so.
It's you mentioned catechizing and catechesis is, and we had a talk about this post our last podcast together, the importance of catechizing. And I said this, I'm going to say it again. I say it all the time on the podcast. If you don't catechize your children, the devil will.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All of us always are being catechized. Something that's always working on to get our affections, right? James K. Smith, and he wrote that cultural liturgy series. Whatever you might think of it, he really does a good job of laying out the fact that everywhere we go, some priest is vying for our heart's affections and worship. You go to the mall, it's saying, buy me. Here's what you will look like when you see a mannequin. Do you want the apparel of the gods? Come on in here. You go to a car. I bought a car recently. Go to a car store. They put these model cars out there, right? Saying this in the commercials and the, TV, and everything is vying for our worship and our affections. It's catechizing us. These cultural liturgies. We're constantly being invited to various temples of worship. And I think it was Ben Merkel. I heard him say in an interview, education, public school education, U.S. Department of Education, they're post-millennial. They're Paedo-Baptists because they know that they believe that in the covenant succession of secular progressivism, they want you from the beginning. They want you at 5 years old because they believe they can change society by indoctrinating you starting at age 5 till 18. They're post-millennial. They're Paedo-Baptists. And that's right. I mean, and every sphere and institution is catechizing. It's trying to train us. Yeah.
That's a really brilliant way to put it about being Paedo-Baptist. I mean, administering the sacrament right away at birth.
Oh yeah.
And that's certainly true. And I mean, it feels so much more intrusive more than it ever has been. And maybe I think we are fairly close in the same age. I mean, you were talking about buying a car, and I remember commercials in the 80s. Do you remember the commercials in the 80s with the Toyota commercial? I love what you do for me, Toyota. And then you see these people jumping in the air. I bought a car. And it probably was back in the 80s. I don't know what a new car was, $8,000 or something, but they're excited. We just, we're strapped with a new debt, and yay!
Oh yeah.
And you think, yeah, I want to be that person. No, I don't.
Oh yeah, everybody, be all that you can be. You name it. It's just marketers have better anthropology, better functional anthropology than lots of Protestants do. Marketers understand the appeal to human desire. They're Augustinian. Augustine's like, we're creatures of desire. We're not creatures of cognition. It's not rational thinking that directs us. It's our affections. It's what we want that leads us. Paul Tripp, one of my former counseling teachers, he says the body only goes where the heart has already gone. And marketers understand that. That's why they invest millions of dollars into 30-second segments to appeal to your affections, because they understand human beings will do what they desire to do. So the jumping people in the commercials connotes joy, and getting celebrities to sell products connotes, well, I could be like that, associative thinking. I want to be great like that person. This person does that. They're better at their anthropology, functionally speaking, than a lot of Protestants are. Just like the Department of Education is better at catechesis, better at covenant succession than lots of Christians are. So it's always going on. We have to do it more fundamentally, and that's obviously a family matter. The most formative institution will always be the family. You can't change it. That's why communists destroy the family, because they know you can't get the kids without destroying the unit.
Yeah. So as I mentioned about the intrusive nature of what's happening with the commercials, we don't have cable TV. We were using things like various apps on our smart TV. And the problem, and so you watch a show, and the problem with those apps is that you get stuck with having to watch a 30-second blip of the commercial. And what you cannot do is change the channel. Right? Because the moment you do anything to get out of it, you have to start your program over. You got to fast forward it, and then they'll slip a new commercial in. So you are stuck and to watch that commercial. And one of the things I've observed with some of these commercials is lesbian couples, homosexual couples, right? And various things that have moved away from a biblical and natural understanding of family to a distorted view. I'll just sell a car, rental area, or
Mhm.
whatever new toy or product. They slip those things in,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and it makes for it's like, wow, I never thought that I would have to do a commentary on a commercial and hit mute and say, all right, or or close your eyes, kids, you know,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
because you don't want that kind of stuff to be get programmed in your kid's mind that this is
Right,
normal, this is a
sure,
normative thing.
right, right.
Um, so it's almost moved us into, all right, we're renting DVDs from the library because at least we know then.
No ads, no intrusive ads. You don't need an ad blocker, I guess, which doesn't work on some of the stations, I guess. Maybe it works
Mhm.
on YouTube. Yeah, it's um I do think cat, cat and it tells a story, right? It doesn't just come right out and make a moral proposition. You need to be okay with lesbian couples. It tells a story, an implicit, quick story of these two people who get together, they're happy, and look at them, celebrate with them, right? It doesn't, without being explicit. I mean, the devil comes, transformed as an angel of light. So it cloaks it in a kind of happy storyline that seduces us more easily, right? A story is more seductive than a sermon, than a
Mhm.
proposition. So that's so deconstructing the storylines
Yeah.
that we're invited into is and you do that with I mean, I'm glad you do that. You stop, and with your kids you become the dominant voice, you become the interpreter of what's going
Mhm.
on.
Yeah.
And the explosive power of a newfound affection too. I think seeing a better thing, you can deal with a counterfeit by seeing the true and learning to love the true, right? Trying to love the authentic is a powerful antidote against being seduced by the counterfeit, right? So this is why a loving, strong, actively Christian home is still the best antidote against worldview seduction of your kids. It's not perfect, obviously. I mean, God is the perfect father, and his kids went rebellious. So you always have to allow room for grace, of course. But he still says, you know, put this on your housetops and your doorpost, and put it on your wrist, and tell to the coming generations, right, what the Lord has done. There still needs to be this active faith succession plan that you're engaged in to help kids think about to think the right way, to have a worldview that is shaped around the biblical story and scripture as opposed to as Caesar, as opposed to Egypt. Uh, you know,
Mhm.
so nothing new.
Yeah. Have you thought about advice that you would give to parents who are starting to see some of these issues coming into the school, um, whether the school already embraces this kind of ideology or is starting to flirt with some of this ideology, secular or Christian?
Mhm.
Have you thought about how you would talk to a parishioner, someone in your congregation, or um, a parent? I mean, what kind of things can they do?
Well, you mentioned both Christian and public education. I more and more think, and this is a matter of wisdom and prudence, not of absolute law. Wish I could make it absolute law, but I don't understand at this point in history, at this point where public education is. You read Luke, I think it's at Rosiak, race to the bottom, where he details what's going on in public education now, and so many other people are, and so much we found out during the pandemic, during what was going on in the classrooms, right? I think Christian parents should pull their kids out of most public schools. I mean, it just seems like it just is it Vodi Bakum who said you can't if you can't send Hebrews into Egypt and then be surprised when they come out as Egyptians or something of that, right? There's just it's so secular, it's so bad. I mean, the hostility, the ideological hostility just seems to be growing. As far as I
Mhm.
can tell, all these blow-ups over things happening, and it's happening here in Pittsburgh, it's happening all over the country. It just is, so that seems to be one practical step is just don't let your kids be educated don't let them be catechized by Caesar, by Egypt. Where possible, get them out of that setting. Uh, I guess that leaves homeschooling and Christian education, which I can understand providentially. Sometimes that is more or less of a possibility for people. I understand those kinds of circumstances. But if at all possible, you know, have your children being formed and shaped and educated, paideia, right? Pedagogic, formed, shaped in a context in which a context which is explicitly Christian, explicitly engaged in assisting you as parents in covenant succession, in passing the faith along, and faith and learning, implying learnings in there in that broader sense of kind of neo-Calvinistic. All truth is God's truth, and you're educating. So when you're doing biology and you're doing geography and you're doing history, you're doing Christian education. So that's a practical step. I mean, if you can't do that, I think, let me back up. The first recognition is, as the parents, you're the chief educator. You're
Mhm.
tasked fundamentally and primarily with the education of your kids. Everything you do, if you send them off to school, that school should be seen as assisting you in doing what it is you want to do, right? Wasn't that what the meaning of in loco parentis is? We become your parents during the day. We're functioning as your parents would function while you're here at this institution, right? So the parents are first. And so that with that understanding, then you got to make the best decisions about the education of kids, and taking them out of most public school education systems has got to be the right step. Getting involved where you can, obviously. We're seeing the pushback on having parents get hands-on involved in parent teacher associations and school board meetings and things like that. These schools don't want that. I understand that, but those schools don't understand that the parents are first. They're first. They determine the education of their kids. That doesn't mean they are necessarily equipped to teach AP chemistry or something.
Right.
But you see
Right.
what I'm saying? So recognize your responsibility, of course. Get them out of public schools. Get involved where you can. See this as a matter of fundamental, I don't want to sound alarmist, civilizational preservation. I mean, this is the generation that's going to be running the world in a
Right.
quarter century. See it as that way. See it as that, right? What kind of citizens do you want to produce? People talk about how bad presidential choices we have. I'm like, well, make a couple presidents, train them up to be presidents, produce them, and then, develop them. I don't know. That's
What
just
about
general
what
advice. Yeah.
what about salt and light? I mean, I agree with you, Mark. I think now is the time to have an exodus. That's my take. That's not TruthXChange's take, but
Mhm,
and we granted, but then of course I'm a little biased. I homeschool our kids,
mhm,
and I mean, Lael is with them, doing all the education, and then at dinner time, one of the things we talk about is what'd you learn today, and then of course we do catechesis at night, but uh, I had heard some parents concerned, well, what about salt and light? Aren't we supposed to be salt and light? Shouldn't we leave our kids in the public schools so that they are that salt and light in that setting?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's always a big argument. I mean, I just get very pragmatic about it. Are your kids actually being missionaries? Are they actually being salt and light? Is your 8-year-old actually shining as a light? Or are they more being formed and shaped by darkness of the world, of worldly ideologies? I grant that this is where I don't meddle in the particularities of providence, right? Maybe it is that some of your children, they actually they're not being deformed in that environment, right? But then your second child is, There's some
Right.
particularities. This is where you as the parent know best. But I don't believe in this blanket kind of argument for keeping kids in horrible ideological catechetical mills, public schools,
Mm.
just for missionary's sake. Most kids are being more formed by the environment than they are influencing the environment, right?
Yeah, it
And
would seem
kids
like
are
that's a
kids.
sorry. It seems like that's an unfair weight to put on a kid.
Yeah,
And you're almost assuming my kid is going to make this impact.
right, right.
Um,
Most of them don't. Most of them get formed more by the environment than they form the environment.
mhm,
I can understand
mhm,
teachers being missionaries,
sure.
but even then, it's so hard when you can't speak basic Christian orthodoxy. Like you
Yeah.
can't say marriage is between a man and a woman. How much can you influence in an environment where certain speech is blasphemy? Orthodox Christian speech is blasphemous. Uh,
Mhm.
Maybe you
Yeah,
can't.
I remember when I was in high school, which was in the middle of the 90s, um, there was, there was our English teacher who was a believer. He was an elder at a Baptist church that was across the street. And he would open his classroom during the lunchtime for Bible study fellowship. Now because as a teacher, he was not, it was public school. He was not allowed to have any hands-on. He was simply to be the chaperone there that was present, but he was allowed to allow his classroom to be open for the use. And and I remember in being in class and certain things being challenged, of presuppositions of the Christian faith being challenged in literature. It's more than the newer literature. And he wasn't able to at that time, I don't know what laws are like now, but I mean, he wasn't able to make any type of stand for his convictions or his beliefs. But yeah, I mean, we work with a number of Christian professors here at TruthXChange. We've got professors that are essentially hiding in the trenches because the administration is gone just nuts, right? I mean, the administration is opening the door, and this is Christian colleges opening the door to all kinds of worldly views and philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't say anything about it because they're concerned about losing their job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At what point do you just where you're so committed to not live by lies, to live not by lies, right? Roger Hare's book, that you just speak the truth and let the chips fall. But I understand being shrewd being properly shrewd,
Right.
and negotiating in a more subversive way, navigating it in a subversive way. But yeah, the hostility, if you take Aaron Renn's, positive, neutral, negative world kind of framing of things, this is what you would expect in a negative world. More increased hostility. And even Christian universities and colleges and schools capitulating. And the light shining brighter as the darkness grows, right? So in some sense, it's definitely happening around human sexuality. There's definitely a sifting around that. And I would even say, the racial ideologies are kind of a sifting as well. The kind of the identitarianism that, around racial justice issues and things like that is very much a kind of sifting, ideological sifting. If you buy into faulty notions of justice, or or you stand, for universal image bearing and norms that don't change according to the color of the people to whom they're being applied. So, yeah, it's something. It's a great time to be a Christian.
That's right. It is. Yeah, absolutely. Last question. It's two-pronged. What encourages you about the students that you're educating now, and what discourages you?
What the?
We probably you hinted at some of the things that discourage you,
Oh
other
yeah,
than
sure.
some of the crazy. I see some of the things you post on Facebook, which is pretty funny. About was it
Yeah,
the
this-
polygamy?
Oh yes, it's just fun. It's just funny to see the patterns. So of course, I did talk about a little bit what is discouraging, is seeing just how powerful social media worldview is, and how it just has a grasp on so many kids. I'm encouraged because there are an awful lot of kids, and the Christian church, right? We don't operate out of a sense of power, so we don't require the majority. God doesn't require the majority of people to succeed in his cause. In fact, he often works by using a few to show that it's him and not us, right? That it's not. Israel was little, but was the light to the nations, right? The apostles were simple men, fishermen, a lot of Galileans, So I'm greatly encouraged by the students who exemplify just ordinary salt of the earth godliness in their particular station and place in life as high schoolers. Because then you go, God, his cause will never be overthrown. He has his faithful, even if it looks like a remnant, and we never know how many are his people, right? So I don't want to get into an Elijah, start crying and, oh, I'm the only one. No, there are lots. So I'm always encouraged by these families that just quietly but diligently do the work of passing on the faith to their children in a godly way. They're not pushing their kids to be super successful in terms of the world's values or out of any materialistic kinds of motivations, but they're just faithfully training them, teaching them, going to church, serving. They have an active, sticky faith, and the kids take that on. They become, diligent young believers who study hard. The school is just one prong in the development of their children. The family's the central, there's the school, the church, and the family being the central institution for forming saints, right? Forming Christians, as it were. And so I'm always greatly encouraged when I see that. I get to see that connection. I get to see this kid is like this because God has used the faithfulness of his parents in this way. And of course, there are kids that are being faithful whose parents may be less faithful. There are faithful parents whose kids are unfaithful. So there's always there's that reality. But I get greatly encouraged by those kids that just seem to be developing in line with what God says. Psalm 78, because then you go, well, the Lord always has his people. His church will not be overthrown. His kingdom, it starts as a mustard seed, it will grow. So it just shows that the church is still going on. The covenant works, covenant succession is happening. And I go, wow, great. I'm glad I get a little bit of a front row seat to that in the lives of a lot of kids.
That's awesome. That's so encouraging to hear, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark, for being on the program. Again, mark your calendars, September 26th through the 30th. TruthXChange second online symposium. I keep wanting to say state of our identity.
This unit? Oh.
That's not the way. It's stolen identity, the theft of the binary in contemporary society.
Right.